Good evening. We're here at New Ostrog Monastery again, the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America. And I gather we're not supposed to use the nationality associated with Orthodoxy unless it's Greek. We can use that one, but evidently none of the others. I'm going to talk to Theology Made Simple. But some people had asked me about some of the bric-a-brac on my desk. You remember we had something about the horse some time ago. It was a rather interesting story. And we discussed the fossil rock that I've got here that's several million years old. I was going to point out the little glass chess set on my desk that was given to me by a grandson. And I never play chess anymore since I became a bishop, because I don't like to play a game where the bishop can get bumped off. But in any case, it's one of the things that clutters my desk. We're going to talk about Theology Made Simple. And now remember, this is precisely made simple. So we're not going to give some full, deep explanation of every theological point. So you needn't get distressed that we haven't covered all the great and fine details. People need to know basic doctrinal teachings about the Church without having to master some arcane vocabulary and know a lot of abstract metaphysical concepts. And I want to explain, though, that the reason reading some of the theological writings is difficult is because when the Holy Fathers were responding, and when they wrote, they were almost always responding, except of course in their sermons, to a challenge to the faith. Now these challenges were made primarily by philosophers, and they were made usually at some philosophical level with all of the trappings that go with it. And in order to respond, the Holy Fathers had to respond in kind, because they had to answer the points that had been put forth. And it was never necessary for the faithful in general to know all those things, but only to know the ultimate point of them. So this is why it becomes difficult. And also the vocabulary, because you have to have the right words to express the right concepts, otherwise the concepts are expressed wrongly. So we'll deal with some of those along the way. The first thing, though, that we are going to touch upon is the teaching of redemption. Someone once commented to me that they were rather surprised to read in one of Yaroslav Pelikan's books that the Orthodox Church has no dogma of redemption. In fact, the Orthodox Church has no dogmas at all in anything vaguely like the Western concept of the term. I realized our seminaries already in the 1800s, and perhaps earlier, had started to use the concept of dogma in the Roman Catholic idea, and not in the Orthodox Christian idea, or the idea of the Holy Fathers. The Holy Fathers did not use or create dogmas in that sense. The Divine Liturgy, we say, is a dogma. The teaching about redemption is not. And this might seem a little confusing, but the teaching about redemption has as its source the understanding of the Incarnation, the nativity of Jesus Christ. All that we believe in the Orthodox Church, everything that we believe, everything that we hold to, flows from our understanding of the nativity of Christ, the incarnation of the living God. And this is the font of all Orthodox Christian theology. We refer back to the creation narrative, of course, but the font of our theology is the nativity of Jesus Christ. And so let's start with that. And again, we'll reflect back briefly to the Genesis narrative, because it's important, because let us take a look. What's essential for us to know at this moment is that mankind was created in full communion with God, and therefore he had never to think about the concept of death. We were created to be immortal through grace. We're not immortal by nature, of course. Our soul is not immortal by nature. We're immortal by grace. And when we're in communion with God, the full communion in the Garden of Eden in paradise, because really this is what paradise means. Paradise is communion with God and the presence of God, the presence of the uncreated light of God. So, in paradise, in that full communion with God, mankind didn't have to think about death. He lived in a relationship of unselfish love. And so the fall is a fall into egotism and selfish love, self-centeredness. Now, at the same time, what the fall means is that mankind pulled himself away from that full communion with God. Now, because of our egotism and our self-centered and our self-focus, suddenly mankind realized, separated from the source of life, death is going to be my destiny in this earthly life. Being egotistical and self-centered, the thought of death became even more traumatic. It became more powerful in us. And then we became afraid of death. And Satan used that fear to keep us in a kind of bondage to him. And that's why Apostle Paul says in the book of Hebrews that we were all of our lifetime held in bondage, that through the fear of death, we were held in bondage by him who had the power of death, that is Satan. And Satan has the power of death because, through fear, he keeps us separated from God. Now, how could we ever return to that condition where we were not in bondage to that fear? Because more fear crept into our lives constantly. Satan used this fear of death to place other kinds of abnormal fears in our lives. Fear of other people, fear of people who are different from us, fear of all kinds of things. And we became deeper and deeper in bondage because of these kind of abnormal fears and the fear of death. So we start with the incarnation of God. Jesus Christ is the living God who came into this world and became a human being like us while still remaining God. Now the question is, why did he do that? Of course, ultimately, the answer is because of his unselfish, co-suffering love with mankind. He wanted to free us from this fear so that it was possible for us to come back into full communion with God. Jesus Christ was a complete human being just like us, but he was also still completely God. And that demonstrated to us or showed us or taught us that God and man can have a very close relationship, and that in that close relationship we can be freed from this bondage and come back into communion with our Father, and so not have the fear of death because of the hope of the resurrection. So our Lord Jesus Christ became man, first of all, to teach us that it's possible for man to come back into communion with God, full communion with God and union with God. And secondly, that we can know God in Jesus Christ. And also to teach us how to come out of bondage to fear and to understand properly what God had taught us. So, the fear of death is the great thing that faces us and the basis of all the other abnormal fears that we have. And Satan constantly uses that to keep us in bondage. Now, I think we're out of time. We'll go on the second video with the same subject.